So this is going to be the B version of 1102. Just check that it's on and everything. Seems to be working. I think I was mentioning last thermodynamics. I read a little bit early. Let me consider an example. Thermodynamics has managed to render its variables like temperature independent of the subjective feeling of hot and cold. But it has not managed to become completely independent on the fact that thermodynamic specialists are situated beings using large-scale thermometers and manometers. At the same time, it has formulated general laws that are valid for any being able to manipulate these instruments. So you can ignore any part of your situation, but not every part of it. That's the crucial point. Because science can go very far in this direction of ignoring elements of the situation. Scientists hope that at the end of the day they will elaborate a form of knowledge that has absolutely nothing to do with the situatedness. But from time to time they bump into some unwelcome consequence of this hope, a stubborn paradox. This reminds me of a lovely metaphor by Kant. He wrote, "The light dove cleaving in free flight the thin air, whose resistance it feels, might imagine that her movements would be far more free and rapid in airless space." And of course, even though the dove has an easy flight in thin air, it cannot fly with no air at all. In the same way, science can make itself independent of many aspects of a situation, but it cannot eliminate completely the very fact of situatedness. So my polemical conclusion at this point is that the blind spot of science is concealed by scientists in the future of the discipline. They believe, but without warrant, that in the future something that is still inconceivable today will allow objective knowledge to account for subjectivity. This is like someone saying, walk far enough and you will eventually reach the horizon. To me, the project of reaching our experience by means of a structure that has been methodologically emptied of experience is just as meaningless as the project of reaching the horizon by walking far enough in its direction. The problem of reaching the horizon is ill-posed, because the horizon is not a thing located in space. And the problem of accounting objectively for experience is ill-posed, because experience is not an object at all. Maybe you are disappointed at this stage and you think, this is a failure of science. What a pity. But is this something to complain about? We could have a more positive reaction. For instance, we could adopt a non-materialist, dualist metaphysics according to which conscious experience is one more constituent of nature, in addition to material objects and properties. Even better, we could adopt Baruch Spinoza's so-called neutral monist metaphysics. In this metaphysics, conscious experience and material appearances are two facets of the same unknown stuff. Spinoza called this stuff God. Deus siva natura, God or nature. According to Spinoza, God was a two-sided coin, with tails made of matter button here. In this metaphysics, conscious experience and material appearance are two facets of the same unknown stuff. Spinoza called this stuff God, Deus sive natura. According to Spinoza, God was a two-sided coin, with tails made of matter and heads made of conscious experience. This is indeed a fascinating option, yet I would like to advocate another possibility, one that dispenses with belief in any metaphysical entity whatsoever. I lean towards this alternative possibility because I am the most extremely skeptical person you will ever meet. I believe nothing except in what I can experience. For me, even Spinoza's neutral stuff is an abstraction with which I'm not very comfortable. So what is the alternative option? It is no longer metaphysics, but a stance, an attitude, the attitude of taking experience seriously, very seriously indeed. Experience is not something you can reach by going out into the world, but you can dwell in it, you can experience it, you can appreciate it. As soon as you have fully appreciated, you tend irresistibly to change the direction of your questioning. In particular, you tend to change the limit between scientifically answerable and unanswerable questions. Let me consider the case of a scientifically unanswerable question, a question that scientists are reluctant to ask. This is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's famous question, why is there something rather than nothing? Almost no scientist thinks that this question could or should be addressed by scientists. Most of them declare, as we have already witnessed, with those who ponder the hard problem of consciousness. This is not a scientific question, and therefore this is no question at all. But this is a question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why are we here now speaking together? Why is there this workshop rather than none? Why do we exist at all? Why is there something standing around us and in us, instead of the complete absence of anything, instead of dumb, thick darkness? It's bewildering. And as I said, scientists usually do not ask this question. They connect phenomena to one another by laws of nature, but they presupposes that there are phenomena. And they do not try to explain why there are phenomena, rather than nothing at all. For instance, they explain why, when I drop this object, it suddenly falls. They connect the phenomena of seeing the object here in my hand to the phenomena of seeing it later on the ground. This connection is made by means of Newton's laws. But what about the glaring fact that there are phenomena rather than none? Silence. Scientists tend to say, this is the question for the damn philosophers. Right. This is not a question for us. But things would be too simple if what I have just said were true. Some immodest physicists declare that they can ultimately provide us with an answer to Leibniz's question. They say that the reason why there is a universe rather than no universe at all is that there has been a huge fluctuation in the quantum vacuum, a fluctuation that we call the Big Bang. The problem is that philosophers have any number of reasons to remain deeply dissatisfied with this answer. They might further ask, Okay, but why is there a quantum vacuum rather than nothing at all? No thing. Not even this elusive ocean of potentialities of which a universe arose. Silence again. At this point, philosophers have made an important move. They have analyzed the meaning of the word something in Leibniz's question. Even the quantum vacuum is something, not absolutely nothing. Scientists can, hopefully, explain the origin of the material universe out of something called the quantum vacuum, but they cannot explain the origin of something out of nothing at all. Now let's go a bit further. What is this something we find when we first open our eyes? What is present here and so obviously different from nothing? Is it a heap of material objects, chairs, tables, stars, galaxies and buildings? Look more closely. What is present here is presence. It's the experience of chairs, tables and buildings. Experience is what is most immediately, most primarily, most radically given to us. Now, if this is so, we are left with no alternative but to change the limit between the answerable and unanswerable questions. Leibniz's metaphysical, scientifically unanswerable question becomes, why is there experience of a physical universe rather than nothing at all? Experience intimately partakes of what is given, of what is there. Then the proper meaning of the Leibnizian problem is that we can explain rules of succession between experience, but not that there is experience rather than none. In other terms, we have to broaden our perception of what is given to us. Usually we say that what is given consists of the things around us or in us, material objects, living beings, thoughts, etc. But all these things are just present appearances, surrounded by present expectations about future appearances. Therefore, what is most fundamentally given to us is the very fact of appearing. Just broaden your sight and you find seeing. This was the first change of attitude among those advocated by Francisco Varela for dealing intelligently with the hard problem of consciousness. The second change derives from the first one. Let's accept that experience is given, that we are thrown into the world of appearances. What should we do next? Once we have accepted and realized this amazing situation, try to see everything from outside. But how could we jump outside our own situation? How could we be absent from our Umwelt? This is impossible. We are here. If we move anywhere, even by thought or by imagination, we are still in our Umwelt. We are still thrown into the world of appearances. Therefore, what can we do? Well, we can cultivate our stubbornly extant situation. This is exactly what Francisco Varela advocated in his new discipline called neurophenomenology. Cultivate the experiential side of what is given, just as much as you cultivate the objectification of the given for the sake of extracting categories and structures of it. Cultivate the attention to experience just as much as you cultivate the structures of experience, and then connect the two aspects to one another. Connect, for instance, your third-person knowledge of the brain, your first-person knowledge of the structures of experience, and then build a new kind of knowledge, which is no longer limited to an objective domain extracted from some bundle of experience, but includes the very fact of experience. Does this approach, advocated by Francisco Varela, solve the hard problem of consciousness? No, it does not. But this is not because the hard problem of consciousness is too hard. This is because the problem does not even arise if the right attitude is adopted. In the proper attitude, you immediately perceive the absurdity of this problem, because you know how to reformulate it. For instance, in a reformulated version of the hard problem, you may ask, how does phenomenality emerge from a certain phenomenon? The brain, often regarded as the locus of our experiential capacities, is also a phenomenon, and it appears in experience. How could phenomenality as a whole, namely experience, derive from a phenomenon? The reason why you are thus able to reformulate philosophical questions like the hard problem of consciousness is that from now on, after those little exercises of phenomenology, you know where you are. You are permanently aware of being thrown into a world of appearances. You are aware of being aware. You also know that the objects out there are objects of your present experience, i.e., within experience. This sudden realization completely changes the epistemological perspective. Such a change of perspective consists in accepting that a physical world of objects is no longer the ultimate standard of being, and objectivity is no longer the ultimate standard of method. But what do we get instead? Should we renounce any precision in thinking? By no means. We can keep precision and still broaden our field of perception. Let's examine more closely the new perspective. Here, the standard of being is underpinned by the standard of self-evidence. Indeed, if we see broadly enough, we realize that our ultimate reference concerning being is nothing other than our own being, our being here and now. Our best standard of being is not represented by tables and chairs. Tables and chairs could well be an illusion. As René Descartes asserted in his first meditation, everything could be an illusion. But what cannot be an illusion is our present experience of doubting. Everybody knows this, but this is not all. Once this has been recognized, the standard of objectivity should be replaced by a project of intersubjective agreement. Indeed, beneath objects there are experiences of objects, and these have to be coordinated to one another if one wants to elaborate a universally valid knowledge. All research striving towards objectivity is grounded in intersubjectivity. Now the interesting point is that we can get intersubjective agreement in a much broader area than just about these objects we are pointing at our fingers. We can also reach intersubjective agreement on certain patterns of our own lived experience. You are now paying attention to something. You are paying attention to my words, or you are paying attention to the object I'm pointing towards. So we are all doing the same thing, at the same moment. Be it with our inner or with our outer tension. We are tending towards intersubjective agreement, but be it about the structure of experience or about some object of environment, intersubjectivity is not less but more than objectivity. So where does that leave us with a hard problem of consciousness? To start moving toward an answer, I'll once again draw a parallel to Wittgenstein. He wrote, "The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of the problem." What Wittgenstein calls the problem of life in this sentence has to do with the difficulties we have in life, the moral issues, the uneasiness of existence, and so on. And he implies that there is no simple formula to solving such a problem. But suddenly, you can find a way of life, a stance, an attitude, in which the problem of life is no longer felt, no longer with you as a burden. You are walking in life without feeling the problem, because you are now beyond it. We might call this enlightenment. Now let me translate Wittgenstein's remark into Varela's language. The solution of the hard problem of consciousness is found in a stance and research program wherein the problem vanishes. In other words, we won't find the solution of the problem of the origin of consciousness in some abstract formula. We'll find it in certain attitude of utter familiarity with experience. Indeed, in this attitude, experience manifests as the obvious given, not as something derivative. In this attitude, experience is the solution, not the problem. Let me summarize what I've said up to this point. First of all, no scientific description can be completely abstracted from the lived situation of those for whom it is relevant. No science can ignore its experiential blind spot forever, because it's at a certain point this blind spot manifests itself as an intractable foundational problem. Conversely, I consider the foundational problem of certain sciences as the incontrovertible sign that they have ignored the blind spot. But if the essential method of science is to attempt to disregard the knower's situation from the object of its knowledge, every science is bound to come up against the same wall. Clearly, the sciences cannot cope with their dream of total knowledge without becoming aware of their own origin. But the relevation of the situated origin of scientific knowledge is cryptic, and it goes against the ethos of a large majority of scientists, because their dream is to reach a world of pure abstraction in which the human situation looks ancillary. Very strangely, then, a world of pure abstraction in which the human situation looks ancillary. Very strangely, then, Western cultures seem to be averse to the ultimate conclusions of the science it has itself produced. As a consequence, changing science is not enough. One has to act on the very culture that made science possible in the first place, in order to understand collectively the foundations of our own science. A major cultural shift indeed. This is likely to be our program for the next century. Thank you for your attention. Here's a question. I think in art history, for the last 30 years or so, there has been a tendency to refer to the classical art history and then the new art history. To generalize the notion of new art history, it attempts to take into account the role of the subject who's writing it and the relativity of the notion of history as such. Obviously, this is an idea that now is somewhat common, a general acceptance of the importance of the subject as a producer of the past, so to speak. You outlined something like a lack of experience informing science, which also has to do with the notion of the placement of the subjects. Do you think maybe science is the last place where the notion of the subject is actually going to be introduced? Bitbol. In fact, there are many disciplines in which this tendency is manifest, and sometimes they connect to one another. When I started my research on the foundations of quantum mechanics, I came across a text by Heisenberg about the relation between art and physics. Heisenberg wrote that what he was doing as a physicist looked remarkably similar to what was happening in the art of his time. In both cases, he declared that we can no longer consider our productions as transparent and irrelevant windows that open up onto the world. In both cases, we can no longer dispense with examining the so-called window. In both cases, we fail in our attempt to represent a world beyond the window, independent of it. In physics, you come back to observables, and in abstract art, you pay more attention to what is present on the canvas than to what is beyond the canvas. Question. You were speaking before about the mystery of consciousness and what's going to happen to it in the future. Do you have any image or metaphor that you think will replace the mystery of consciousness? Is there something else that will take the place of the mystery of consciousness? Bitbol. I consider the mystery of consciousness to be a mystery of mysteries. For what is mysterious in it is that there are mysteries as all. If there were no consciousness, there would not even be a sense of mystery. Usually, the sense of mystery is not reflected upon itself. It is rather directed towards something else. As a consequence, when people wonder about anything, including about the origin of consciousness, they usually project their attention towards something else. They don't realize that in this precise case, by raising the question of consciousness, what they are trying to do is account for the origin of their very question. This is a unique case. There is no other problem like the problem of consciousness. All the other problems are about something, but this one is not about something. It is, so to speak, about aboutness. Question. So you would like to say that our relations to consciousness is more like a spiritual position? No, I would not say that. Because as soon as you have pronounced the word such as spiritual or mental or something, you have unwittingly objectified the issue. You oppose the spiritual, say, to the material, but here, in the case of conscious experience, there is nothing to oppose it to, because any opposition is itself experienced. Opposition, as everything else, is part of the mystery of mysteries. So what could be the next step then? Being unconscious about everything. I think you got a good point there. This is a possibility that's advocated by the most lucid scientists, since they are not interested in the ultimate mystery of consciousness, because it is unscientific. They tend to insist that many mental workings can unfold unconsciously, and they get interested in implementing these latter processes on computer simulations. Even consciousness is defined by them in abstract terms, such as metacognition, which deprives it from its most crucial nucleus, which is the experiential or phenomenal, so much that they open the way to project or nightmare of post-humanistic mental-like and conscious-like system. But we are not only scientists or engineers, we are living sentient beings, and we are extremely interested in the vexing issue of lived experience. In fact, we are necessarily interested in interest. Once again, when I speak about conscious experience, I introduce a lot of self-referential loops, because it is the only way we have to grasp an essential aspect of the problem. In order to begin to grasp it once again, we must suspend any attempt of fleeing towards objects, including cognitive, mental, or spiritual objects. We must suspend interest in everything, except the interest in interest itself. This suspension is what Husserl called epoché. A well-known Buddhist metaphor is sedimentation. When you let dust settle into water, it falls. The liquid slowly grows transparent, and you see transparency. With epoché, things are similar. You suspend attention to objects, and suddenly you see what you're after. You dwell in it. It's not an object, but it's there. How grand. Thank you, Michel Bitbol. I know this was a revisiting of his famous speech. I heard it from many sections, but I think it was well worth, because it's absolutely excellent. Commentary I will provide in the next lecture. Thank you very much, and have a very pleasant afternoon.